Hello everyone, welcome to Psychology 303, Analysis of Everyday Behavior, and today we're going to talk a little bit about token economies. So in the past we've obviously talked about reinforcement and how effective it can be in changing behavior, and we've talked about some of the different variations or different formats of reinforcement that we can use. But there's one format of reinforcement that is actually quite common within ABA, within the different behavioral modification techniques that we can use, and this is known as a token economy. And more often than not, people have encountered a token economy at some point in their lives. They probably just don't recognize it as a token economy. So let's use an example to kind of define exactly what this is. So say we have a child who has broken the law. They're now a juvenile delinquent, and they're kind of shuttled off to an institution to help with their negative behaviors. In this institution, this child, let's name him Sammy, has various tasks that he needs to perform, such as make his bed, brush his teeth, maybe fold laundry as part of kind of a job or task that he has at the institution. And at this institution, the people in charge have the system set up where each child has a card, and each time they perform a desirable behavior, such as making their bed, brush their teeth, etc., they get a stamp. And once the child fills up their stamp card, then they can trade that card in for some kind of, I don't want to say reward, because again, it's not a reward, some other kind of treat that they can use. So you can trade in maybe one card to play 30 minutes of video games, or you could trade in a card to get an hour of basketball time, or you can trade in multiple cards to get better rewards. This is an example of a token economy. So for every positive or desirable behavior this child performs, they get a token, in this case a stamp, and then they can collect these stamps in the form of a card in this example, and then trade these tokens or these stamps in for different things. They could be actual physical things, they can be experiences such as playing basketball, video games, etc. But you're not immediately kind of getting that reward for the behavior. You have to accumulate these good behaviors, and then they can transition into this, again, not reward, but this kind of other treat or this other privilege or experience that the child would enjoy. So that's an example of a token economy. And again, we're focused on reinforcement here. We want to encourage positive behaviors. Every time a child performs a desirable behavior, they get a token. It could be a stamp, but it needs to happen immediately after that desirable behavior. After the individual has collected enough tokens, they can then exchange a certain number of those tokens for what's known as a backup reinforcer. This is this kind of privilege or experience or treat that the individual kind of wants as the end goal. These are typically very powerful reinforcers. So rather than how we've talked about reinforcement in the past, where maybe every time a person does something good, you give them praise, or every time a person does something good, maybe you give them $1. These backup reinforcers would be pretty big deals. It might be like $100, or it could be a car, or it could be something ridiculous like that. So we see these types of behavior modification strategies all the time. So reward systems on your credit card, you get rewards points. If you go to a coffee shop, you may have a rewards card. You're building up points or building up stamps and such. So then you can use those to actually get something better. You might use your rewards points on your credit card to buy something on Amazon. You might use your miles that you collect with your airline to be able to buy a flight somewhere. These are examples of token economies. You're building up these tokens, these points or these stamps, you're accumulating them, and then you're using them to get this backup reinforcer, which is reinforcing that initial behavior of buying things with your credit card, of buying flights, of buying coffee at your local coffee store. So even though the reinforcer's backup reinforcer is not immediately following the behavior that it's reinforcing, the tokens are. And that's the key. There is some kind of immediate reinforcement, but the ideal reinforcer isn't coming until a little bit down the line. So how do we implement a token economy? Well, not surprisingly, there are several steps. First, you want to figure out what is the behavior that you want to reinforce. What is this desirable behavior? Then we want to identify, all right, what are the tokens that we want to use? Ideally, they need to be easy to give out, they need to be practical, they need to be tangible. If you can hold it in your hand, it's a lot more effective. And also, they need to be unique. You, as the person implementing the token economy, you should be the only person who can acquire or hand out these tokens. It shouldn't be the case where the individuals who are trying to collect the tokens, they can just go somewhere else to get the tokens. They should only be able to get those from you. So that's why you see in some places that use a token economy, maybe say Dave & Buster's, for example. You collect tickets, those tickets are unique to Dave & Buster's. You can't go and get those anywhere else. You're not going to be able to use tickets that you buy from other places at Dave & Buster's. You need those. We see this with the little stamp cards as well. A lot of times, say example, a coffee shop, they have a very unique stamp that they use to denote if you've bought a cup of coffee. You can't get that stamp anywhere else. They might have it especially made to prevent people from cheating the system. So we've identified what we want to use as tokens. Now we want to identify what those big backup reinforcers are. Ideally, they should be tailored. They should be especially enticing to the people who are collecting the tokens. So maybe if you have people having one of the coffee cards, maybe it's a year's worth of coffee that they can exchange these tokens for. Very specialized to that demographic. Importantly, these backup reinforcers can be a whole host of different outcomes, basically. It can be consumables, it can be objects that you purchase, maybe trading in tickets for a stuffed animal. It could be activities, trading in tokens for that extra 30 minutes of video game time, or it could be privileges. Maybe if you use a token economy at home, that privilege could be staying out an extra 30 minutes longer at night, or an extra hour. The only thing that really can't be a backup reinforcer would be basic rights. You wouldn't want to have to withhold food or water or shelter from someone because they haven't accumulated enough tokens. That's not ethical. You also need to decide the schedule of reinforcement. Ideally, if we talked about reinforcement before, we want to start with continuous reinforcement, then shift to intermittent reinforcement if we want that behavior to occur after the intervention. Also, we want to try to reinforce behaviors early and often to try and get them invested in this system. So having backup reinforcers that people can acquire with a few tokens, that way they start to actually use the tokens and understand how the system works. You need to establish exactly what the exchange rate is for these tokens. So yes, you have a bunch of backup reinforcers. How many tokens is each of these reinforcers going to be worth? You also need to figure out how many tokens a person can acquire each day. And then you need to figure out how people are going to actually acquire the backup reinforcers. Are they going to do this in person? Can they talk to anyone? Is there a specific time and place they need to go? This needs to be set up in advance so people who are trying to accumulate the tokens know exactly how the system works. If you go to Dave & Buster's and collect tickets, you know that you can't take those tickets to a Chuck E. Cheese and try and purchase things there. There's a very specific place you need to go to exchange those tokens for those backup reinforcements. Once a token economy has been established, we can continue to use reinforcement, but we can also start to implement response cost, start to implement punishment a little bit. So in the case of the juvenile delinquent institution, yes, we're interested in encouraging positive behavior, but we might want to also focus on limiting those undesirable behaviors. So we might actually take away tokens or take away stamps or take away tickets from individuals who behave poorly. We need to wait until the economy has been established so that way the tokens and the backup reinforcers are actually reinforcing. So that way when those tokens are taken away, it actually means something to them. But there are certain things you need to consider if you do want to implement response cost. Primarily, you want to make sure that you don't take away all of the tokens from someone. There has to be a limit to how many tokens you can take away because you don't want clients to get aggressive. You don't want the individuals to start to fight amongst themselves for acquisition of these tokens because that would defeat the whole purpose of encouraging desirable behaviors. The people who are implementing these systems need to be well trained and well versed in ABA and understanding exactly how the token economy works. Tokens also need to be delivered pretty consistently for the economy to be effective. So need to be watching out for every single instance of that positive behavior and make sure that the reinforcement of the token comes after every instance of the behavior. Ideally, what you want to do while delivering these tokens is to also deliver praise, verbal praise to the individual. So if a person, say the juvenile delinquent, actually makes their bed, you say, hey, great job, thanks for making your bed, here's a token. That way it's not just the token that's kind of reinforcing the behavior, but to a certain extent it's also praise. And that's because we, at some point, are going to be shifting away from a token economy. We want to shift to more natural reinforcers because oftentimes, yes, we do see token economies occur quite often, but that doesn't happen with every single behavior that we see in the real world. So ideally, we want to shift the occurrence of these behaviors to not be reliant on tokens, but to be reliant on other reinforcers such as praise or social support. So there are obviously some advantages and disadvantages to token economies. It's highly structured. People know exactly what they're getting into with the token economy. They know that their behaviors are going to be reinforced, so all they have to do is perform that behavior and then they're going to get the tokens. Tokens, especially if you're doing this properly, are going to be easy to deliver. Response cost is also easy to implement, and in terms of punishments that can be used, again, we're using punishment alongside reinforcement, which is the best way to use punishment. And one other kind of interesting thing about token economies is that it can also teach individuals how to delay gratification. Ideally, if you have a wide variety of backup reinforcers available, yes, people could accumulate tokens until they get to whatever reinforcer is the least costly to get, the one that costs the least amount of tokens. Or they can slowly pool their tokens to try and hold out to get that one that costs the most, maybe the new car. Or if you've ever been to Dave & Buster's, they always inevitably have video game systems available, but it takes a lot of tickets to get it. So people who are able to delay gratification, able to hold off on purchasing those small items and wait for the big item, that can help these individuals in the long run, help individuals regulate their behavior in some way, shape, or form. So those are the advantages. There are disadvantages, though. It takes a lot of time and effort and sometimes money to set up these token economies. That's why you don't see them absolutely everywhere. You see them frequently used by major corporations who have the resources to be able to do this. And honestly, training can be tedious. If you have to teach other people how to correctly implement and how many tokens to give out for each individual behavior, what behaviors to look out for, etc., it can be extremely time consuming and people might not necessarily be on the same page. So sometimes it is extremely necessary to implement some of these token economies, and you need to take the time and effort to do so, especially if we think about the juvenile delinquent situation. That situation seems ripe for using these techniques. But for just menial day-to-day modification, reinforcement of behaviors, you probably don't want to go to all the trouble to create a token economy. So that's all I have today. Thank you for your time and attention on token economies. I will see you on the next video. Bye.